Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the astonishing youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. What's going on, young man?
I will take the astonishing that you threw at me, and I'm not going to give you anything back because nothing will top astonishing. I mean, I could say flawless, Troy Otradovic, I guess, but
nobody will believe you if you say that.
I was going to say you're even going to laugh.
You would then be deemed a liar. You said flawless. Oh, you don't need to give me any names. I'm the old man. I'm the old man who forgets a lot. There's my name.
Mm-hmm. That is true. But, yeah, I'm good.
Buddy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, this is I have no idea where we're going to go with this today, but, oh, my gosh. I was kind of waiting for this type of weekend to happen, though, Kevin.
Yep.
Just where, like, the dominoes just all fall and the top 10 is just scrambled up. There's always one weekend every year that this happens, and it may not be the only one this year. But I was waiting for the first one, and my gosh, it's going to be a great show today talking about everything that happened and our thoughts on it. I'm going to turn it back over to you the way that we normally start the show. For those that always listen in, you know that the youngster is going to start going through the top 10 and touch on some in the top 25 because now we got Big Ten teams outside of the top 10. And then we're going to talk Big Ten and just general college football. But take it away, youngster. Let's go through this new AP top 25, air quoting top 10.
Yeah, we're going to get into everything. But number one is still Alabama. That did not change. Number two is Penn State after they had a bye. So Penn State did nothing. Moved up from number 3 to number 2. Pretty cool to see Penn State as the number 2 team in the country. I saw a stat on Twitter. I think it was like the last time Penn State was ranked number 2, and it was something I think in the 90s. Maybe I'm incorrect on that, but it was a long time ago. And so to see Penn State at number 2 is just cool. As someone who does a Big Ten show, Georgia moved up from number 4 to 3. TCU from 6 to 4. That number 2 team. Well, I guess I'll finish the top 10 first. But TCU moved up from 6 to 4. Wisconsin 7 to 5. Ohio State 9 to 6. There's Clemson, who I was going to mention, who dropped from number 2 to number 7. We've been talking, and I'm sure Troy will mention this as well when I hand the floor to him. But typically these teams drop around 9 to 10 spots no matter where you're ranked. Even Ohio State was ranked number 2, and they fell to 11, I think it was, the following week, even after they lost to a team like Oklahoma. But so Clemson loses to Syracuse, and they only dropped from 2 to 7. That was interesting to me, very interesting to see where Clemson was going to end up because you're starting to get teams now who are basically everyone has lost a game. You've got your occasional teams. I guess the top 5 has not lost, and then you got Miami at number 8 at 5-0. But you're starting to see the AP
bias. That's all I'm going to say. Bias. I'm not going to get into my point. I told you I wouldn't, but I told you I would interrupt you with sarcastic comments. Bias.
Yeah, so you're starting to see every team lose a game, and you're starting to have to see the pollsters pick and choose which one-loss team is better than the other, which is cool. It's fun to see because now it's actually starting to get interesting. You can't just say, this team lost a game, so we're going to put them ahead or below, all these, 10, 15 undefeated teams. It's starting to get interesting now as we move into week 8 of the college football season, which is just crazy to talk about. But Miami moved up from 11 to 8. They survived their game. I think they played North Carolina, and they survived. They're 5-0. Oklahoma moved up from 12 to 9. Oklahoma State 14 to 10. I'll leave it there. But so in general, the top 10, before I toss back to you, Troy, 2 of the top 5 teams lost. I had already mentioned Clemson, and then 4 of the top 10 as a whole lost. Again, Clemson lost to Syracuse 27-24. Their quarterback, Kelly Bryant, got knocked out, didn't play in the second half, so that obviously played a role in the final score. But Syracuse, I think, and I don't have it in front of me, I guess, but I can look it up, but Syracuse either had the lead at halftime or they were very close. They were fighting Clemson to the nail in that entire first half. So it wasn't as though Clemson was, up 14-0. They lost their quarterback, and then a disaster ensued. Syracuse was playing them tough regardless. Number 5, Washington lost to Arizona State 13-7. Washington was one of those teams that I had mentioned at the start of the year that could win the whole thing because their offense can score with just about anyone. And they went 3 for 14 on third downs. They lost. They scored 7 points against an unranked team. Washington State, the number 8 team in the country, I haven't mentioned them yet. I haven't mentioned Auburn yet at number 10 from a week ago. But Washington State lost to Cal 37-3. And Washington State was one of those teams Troy and I were talking about that it's like
big jumper. Big jumpers.
Yeah, exactly. They were one of those huge jumpers that barely beat USC by like 3 points at home one night, and it was like, oh my God, this is Washington State's game of the century basically, and they come out with a win. And then I think they won a game last week as well, so I think there was a little mini win in the middle. But then Washington State plays California and loses by 34 points, and Luke Falk, the quarterback who, slings it all over the field for Washington State, threw 5 picks. This just confirmed to basically Troy and I in the country that Washington State's not the 8th best team in the country. We thought they would lose and fall to 20 whenever that were to happen, and they dropped to 15. So not as harsh a drop, but they still dropped. And 15 is probably right where Washington State should be, if not a little further down, to be honest. But number 10, Auburn, before I hand it to you, Troy, they lost to LSU 27-23. Auburn led 23-14 going into the fourth quarter, and then lost the fourth quarter, which is the most important, as you can ask the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl. They lost the fourth quarter 13-0. That was it. Auburn had looked really good this year outside of playing Clemson and losing, but now Auburn's got 2 losses. They're the number 21 team in the country. They've, with 2 losses, you've got no shot. There's a little wiggle room, more than there was from the BCS era where you only have 2 teams and computers were picking you in. But now, even with 4 teams and humans deciding, which you can say what you want about that, but you're offered 1 loss, but once you have 2, there hasn't been a team yet that has gotten 2 losses in the regular season and went on to the college football playoff in its 3 years of existence, as far as I know. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Troy. But I will hand it back to you. That's the top 10. 4 of the top 10 teams from a week ago lost, which, it means Wisconsin can jump up to number 5 in the country. Penn State doesn't have to play. They're now number 2. And Ohio State now 6th. So they're starting to gain some traction as well, as they're basically burying everyone they play.
Yeah, I want to start with this Clemson drop. You mentioned it. They only dropped 5 spots after losing to a Syracuse team. And, hey, hats off to Syracuse. Good job, Syracuse. But I interrupted you with a sarcastic comment. Well, it wasn't even a comment. It was just a word, and I said it like 5 times, bias. This, to me, is the voters trying to keep Clemson in the national playoff picture. Because every other team, Kevin, including your Ohio State Buckeyes, when they lost, just pummeled down the hill. There was no mercy shown anywhere up to this week on any top 10 team that lost. So to me, these voters, it's getting closer to that poll that comes out from the committee. And the voters are trying to keep Clemson near the top. Here's the thing. If I look at consistency, and that's what I like when I'm looking at these things, just be consistent. I don't care if you're wrong every week. Be consistent. I saw my first inconsistency this week, Kevin. If everyone else is going to drop, Clemson should have dropped farther in my book. Now, are they the 7th best team in the country? Maybe. But I'm looking at the prior body of work. This is what irks me about these polls, is that it's all human nature and it's bias. But to me, and I'll get your quick thought, I think these poll people are looking at it saying, oh, well, Clemson is a good team, so we're just going to, we'll drop them a few spots. Well, then go way back to when Ohio State lost, because they lost to a better team and you dropped them farther than you dropped Clemson. I don't get it, Kevin. What did you think? I mean, Is Clemson the 7th best team in the country? Probably. But when you look at a prior body of work, wouldn't you agree with me that they should have dropped farther based on the way the poll guys have done it all year? Did I lose you, Kevin?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Hey, technical difficulties. That's okay. So what do you think? I mean, is there a little bit of bias involved here?
I don't know if there's bias. It's impossible to tell, but I wanted to go back and see where Ohio State dropped after Oklahoma because I thought it was from 2 to 11, and I was wrong on that. It was from 2 to 8. So I guess Ohio State dropped the spot those next couple weeks before they started gaining traction again, even though they were winning. So they dropped from 2 to 8. But that was
a much tougher game, Kevin.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost to another top 10 team. Clemson lost to Syracuse.
Oh, I know.
When's the last time Syracuse was a football? They've had good teams, but not great teams. I can't remember the last time that Syracuse was a scary football team, and they knocked out the number 2 team in the country. Good for Syracuse, but my God, Clemson. If you lose to Syracuse, you have no right playing right now in the national championship. I mean, you don't. You lost to Syracuse.
Yeah, Clemson lost to Pitt a year ago, and Pitt was a decent little team. I think they ended up with 9 wins. I'm not 100% sure on that, but they were a decent team at the least. So to lose, a 3-point game to Pitt, it's like, okay, it is what it is. Auburn losing to LSU, it is what it is. They shouldn't get hammered for it, but it is their second loss. I understand that. Washington State getting obliterated by Cal, you should drop hard. Washington losing to Arizona State. Arizona State's a very average team this year, but it's still Arizona State. It's not even Syracuse. I mean, I put Arizona State a notch above Syracuse for sure. That's a terrible loss. It was a complete shocker, and I think that we are guilty on this show, at least I'll speak for myself, that I'm guilty of saying, when looking ahead to the following week's games, or even recapping what happened for the past weekend, we'll say, okay, Ohio State plays Purdue, and Ohio State should win by 24 points. That's even what Vegas thinks. And then they win by 31, and it's like, yep, Ohio State should have done that. Move on. Not necessarily just, they should have done it, move on, because you're seeing these teams, Clemson losing to Syracuse, Washington State getting killed, Washington losing to Arizona State, Auburn losing to LSU. If you're playing a conference game, especially on the road, and you win, that's okay. That's fine. That's a plus. It's a win. Even if you move back one spot in the polls because of whatever happens around you, it is what it is. But it says something to win, and especially in college football. Again, if you lose twice, you're done, no matter who you are. But so to win, again, on the road, at home, whatever, against Rutgers, against Purdue, against Michigan, whoever it is, you should be applauded for it because it is a conference game. It's a Power 5 team. These schools aren't necessarily doormats. I mean, Rutgers even proved that they're supposedly better than Illinois this past week by 11 points. I think that game was at Illinois, and Rutgers still scored 35. So I think that, outside of maybe 5 programs across these Power 5 conferences, if you beat anyone, it should be applauded. Yes, Ohio State should kill teams like Rutgers, but it's still, okay, you won by 30 points, you should have, but you still won by 30 points. You're not Clemson. You didn't go to Syracuse and lose a game. I mean, that's insane. It's a shocker, but something like that almost happens every other week where it's just a shock. And Washington losing to Arizona State on a normal week, it's like, holy crap, that's crazy. Obviously, everyone's talking about Clemson. Washington State getting crushed by 34 points, the number 8 team in the country, loses to an unranked team by 34 points. It's insane. But no one's really necessarily talking about it because of every other upset that happened. I guess my point is that these teams that we gloss over, and Wisconsin's going to be one of them, I think, when we recap Week 7, that it's like, okay, Wisconsin beat Purdue 17-9. It's not very sexy. That's Wisconsin. Their defense stepped up. They ran the ball. They had some success, but they didn't score a lot of points. How good really is Wisconsin? But in short, you still beat a decent little Purdue team that can score, and yet Wisconsin, when they needed to, got stops. They got 4 red zone stops, and Purdue scored 3 points in 4 red zone opportunities. I think that speaks a lot more than what people will actually talk about, or we will even talk about, even though I just very quickly went over the game. But
that's
I think
because they're not the fifth best team in the country, Kevin. They're not.
Yeah.
They really, to be honest, I'll put it this way, they should have lost to Purdue. But their defense is great. I mean, their defense is really good. It's a defense that probably is not going to get the accolades that a Michigan defense gets or even an Ohio State defense gets, but that Wisconsin defense is pretty darn good. They're creating turnovers because they fly to the ball and they create their opportunities. But to stop a team in the red zone, I don't care if it's Purdue, I don't even care if it's Rutgers. To stop a team in the red zone that many times, you got to be pretty darn good. And that defense, I think, has been very underappreciated by the national media. But they're only going to go as far as that defense goes. And I know you didn't want to talk about too much about Wisconsin, but being a Wisconsin guy I got to give them kudos. The problem I have with it is, though, they are playing against inferior offensive teams. I know Purdue's pretty good, and so don't take that the wrong way, but they haven't been matched up against an I shouldn't say an Ohio State offense, but I will give you this, Kevin. In the red zone, I think Ohio State is pretty good, but they haven't played a Penn State offense. They haven't played a top-tier offensive team that is very efficient in the red zone. And so to do it against Purdue, it is very good. And that defense is very good, but they really haven't been tested when you look at it from that standpoint. But, they are doing what they need to do. So there's no apologizing for a win. There's no apologizing for moving up in the polls. I just don't think that they're the fifth best team in the country. But they're not losing, knock on wood. So they deserve to keep moving up the polls because this is where the voters put them in the beginning of the year. And now they have no choice but to keep moving them up if they keep winning.
And even so, do you put them underneath a USC team who has looked kind of average but has skated by teams and is 6-1, or Oklahoma State at 5-1, Oklahoma at 5-1, when Wisconsin all they do is just run all over everyone they play and play good defense against anyone? So it's hard to say, Clemson's better than Wisconsin. Oklahoma's better than Wisconsin. Talent-wise, Oklahoma is better than Wisconsin. There's no doubt in my mind. But Oklahoma has been kind of shaky these last few weeks, and there's no question that Wisconsin defensively and running-wise has absolutely looked better than Oklahoma has. So Oklahoma's defense has kind of just completely fallen off a cliff since that Ohio State game, realistically. I think they played Texas to a very close game. I think Texas had a shot at winning the game at the end, I think on the last play, but they escaped. So Oklahoma moved up 3 spots. They're up to number 9, which shows how much craziness ensued. But I just think in general, if you win a conference game and it's not a absolute complete doormat, although, again, Clemson just lost to Syracuse, it should be applauded, and these teams deserve to be where they are, even though, like you said, Troy, I don't think Wisconsin's the 5th best team in the country either, but they should be there right now because all these other teams are falling.
I agree with you. I agree, and like I preface that by saying, they've done nothing to not warrant moving up in the rankings.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for that kid from Penn State, Mr. Taylor would be the front runner for the Heisman after his performance again against Purdue. Not a great defense, but man, all this kid does is run, Kevin. He just runs. They give him the ball and he runs and he gets yards. That's all he does. But, it's nice to say, hey, this guy's got a bright future. Is the Heisman realistic for him? Probably not, because there's a lot of other candidates. But, man, this kid is certainly going to be on the forefront next year, I believe, and as a preseason guy, because who would have thought this Taylor kid from Wisconsin? He just gets the ball, give him the ball, and all he does is run. He just runs. He's like Forrest Gump. He just keeps running and running and running and running. And gets yards. It's fun to watch. He is a fun guy to watch. And I look, and maybe for a different show we can maybe spend time, since the Big Ten show and Wisconsin has been known for its running backs, is maybe farther in the season, depending on how he does, maybe take a look back. Where does he rank single season performances among Wisconsin backs because they've had a lot of great ones. But let's get back to the point. Kind of got off the tree limb there. Let's get back to where we were at.
We'll stick with Wisconsin because I'm done with the top 10. I guess I can actually no. Okay, I will forget what I just said. We'll visit Wisconsin when the first team we revisit for recapping this past week's game will be Wisconsin, and I can talk about that and historical stuff with Taylor because what he's doing is ridiculous. But 11 is USC, 12 is Washington, so Washington dropped from 5 to 12 after they lost by 6 points. Notre Dame moved up from 16 to 13. That's a team that is the only team that's beaten Michigan State, and they just keep winning, and they're now number 13 in the country. Virginia Tech moved from 15 to 14. Washington State fell down to 15, like I mentioned. South Florida is the top group of 5 conference school that I mention every single week. They're 16th. They actually are tied in points. They're tied at 16th in the country with North Carolina State. So, again, that kind of represents how this poll is configured. We have 2 teams ranked number 16 in the country right now. Michigan State is 18. They're 10 points away from being the 16th team in the country, which is basically nothing.
Got to fire the coach, Kevin. Got to fire the coach. Got to fire the coach at Michigan State. Is he doing a good enough job?
Oh, my Lord. I think he's doing just fine, but I actually said Michigan State before I mentioned Michigan. And Michigan State was 21 last week. Michigan was 17. Both teams won. But Michigan was actually favored to beat Indiana by 6 points, and we said, no way, Michigan's going to cover that spread, and they did. So if you took Troy and I's lock of the week last week, listeners of the show, if you took Troy and I's lock of the week last week, which was Michigan -6 for you betting people, they covered the spread. They moved down in the polls. They're now behind Michigan State. They had to go to overtime with Indiana, but they still covered. So I'll say that much. Our lock of the week.
I will say this, though, Kevin. We were it was our lock. It was our lock of the week, and we'll have another one this week, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But we have to tell the listeners we were kind of wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least I was. I thought Michigan would come out and destroy Indiana in the scowl of Jim Harbaugh and the fear of Jim Harbaugh. Maybe Michigan doesn't have it. Because I would have thought against Indiana, an inferior opponent against that team, and I guess it's not even because offensively for Michigan, we know there's some question marks. Almost like they're almost a mirror image of the Wisconsin team. But
yep.
Offensively, Michigan's not that great. I was surprised what Indiana did against that defense, and especially to go down at the end of the game and get it to overtime. I would have thought that an elite defense like Michigan, that would have never happened. If I'm a Michigan fan, I'm thinking, our defense is on the field. They'll stop Indiana. You got to give credit to Indiana. My concern here is, Kevin, though, that defense didn't look so great against Indiana, which is a team that's not going anywhere. But, again, it's 1 week. Indiana, you got to give hats off. But that Michigan defense is what we've been talking about all along, and they didn't have their best of games this week, Kevin.
No, they didn't. If you would tell me that Indiana would score 20 points, though, on Michigan, it wouldn't surprise me because I think in just watching Indiana week 1 against Ohio State, they made incredible plays on the outside with their receivers and their quarterback situation. They'll play 2 of them, but they get good quarterback play one way or another. Those are actually 2 starting quarterbacks in Division I college football at a Power 5 level. But so they have an offense this year. It's not a fluke that they scored, 21, 28 points, whatever it was against Ohio State. Now you score 20 against Michigan. Not that that's a lot, but it's something against quote-unquote, elitely talented defenses. So I guess in short, yeah, Troy and I were both wrong. I thought Michigan would have won that game by 13-plus points. Something, 27-14, something like that would have been my guess. But we covered our spread. We're 1-0 for locks of the week. Our locks, I guess, is what we'll call it. But I wanted to mention again, Michigan State is 18, Michigan is 19. Michigan State beat Michigan, obviously, earlier this year, but they were flipped. Michigan was still ranked ahead of Michigan State, and we said, it'd be crazy for Michigan State to be ranked ahead of Michigan because obviously the better team played this game 10 times. Michigan beats Michigan State probably 8 times. Michigan's the better team, but now Michigan State has jumped over Michigan. I wanted to get your thoughts, Troy. There's nothing else notable in the top 25 other than Iowa receiving 2 votes from a Big Ten perspective, and Navy got kicked out. They lost to Memphis. Navy got kicked out of the top 25. But your thoughts on Michigan State and Michigan?
They had their day in the sun, didn't they, Navy? Yeah. But I'll jump right into it as far as my thoughts on this. It's the way the polls work, Kevin. You mentioned it. There's nothing else for me to say here. You play this game. You said 9 out of 10. I'll say 90 out of 100, which comes out to the same, maybe even 99 out of 100 games. Michigan this year probably wins that game. But it's the way the polls work, and it's the way the voters are going to look. Well, Michigan, didn't play. I guess I should say this: close game against Michigan, a loss. Right now, they're not in the voters' favorite. They're not in the favoritism of the voters, and that's what it is right now. These polls are all about being in good graces with the voters. And that's why I keep saying I'm surprised where Wisconsin is, but they deserve where they're at because nothing looks pretty with Wisconsin. They're not going to roll out a 42-10 victory unless they get a bunch of turnovers on defense and get pick sixes. But the way the polls roll out, do I think Michigan State should be ahead of Michigan? No. But the way the polls are rolling out, that's the way it rolls out. And, again, you can't ever apologize for doing what you're supposed to do, and that's win ball games. I interrupted you sarcastically again. We talked about the Michigan State coaching situation, and I'll be honest. They've got a tough schedule. We've talked about their schedule, but they're continuing to win. So what kind of job is he doing? And it's funny that just 4 weeks ago they were talking about, my God, maybe we need to make a change at coach. Maybe we need to make a coaching change. And so now what do you do? Because they do have a tough schedule coming up. What if they only win 2 of the remaining games? They've got into the top 20. And if the boosters now if they want to be real picky about it and they go on this losing streak, well, you got to look at the opponents they're playing because they could end up losing a number of games here at the end of the year, Kevin. But right now, I don't think that they should be ahead of Michigan. But the way the season is rolling out is the way that this poll rolls out because I do think Michigan is still a better team than Michigan State. But, you don't apologize for winning, and you don't apologize for where the poll voters put you. And for Michigan State, this is where the voters want them. So I think Michigan is a better team, but I'm not a voter. That's all I got.
Yeah, I think so as well. I've got 2 quick points before we move on to recapping games. Michigan State, again, the AP poll, the way it goes is by points, and if you're ranked number 1 by 1 voter, there's a ton of different AP voters. If you're ranked number 1, you get a set amount of points. I think it's 25 points. If you're ranked number 25, then you get 1 point. It's based on a point system. Michigan is 5 points behind Michigan State, a.k.a. if someone put Michigan 13 instead of 19, they'd be ranked ahead of Michigan State. Or you can look at it as the point difference between number 19 Michigan and number 20 UCF. If you give those same amount of points to Michigan, that same differential, Michigan would be the 14th team in the country. So there's a huge drop-off from 19 to 20, Michigan to UCF, and there's a bunch of teams log-jammed kind of from 14 to 19. That's how the AP voters see it. But just in general, I think Michigan's the better team as well. But Michigan State has 5 more points. That's the case this week. And my second point, very short point, was for the last 2 weeks, Michigan State's looked like the better team. Michigan State beat Michigan at Michigan, and Michigan State kind of controlled things for the most part against Minnesota, even though they only won by 3 points. The fourth quarter just all went Minnesota's way. But Michigan State dominated the game for most of it. And Michigan, again, struggled against Indiana, had to go to overtime. So Michigan State's looked better recently, which is in part why probably Michigan State is ranked ahead of Michigan. I will move on now to recapping Week 7, and I said I would go to Wisconsin first. And they beat Purdue 17-9, and we were talking about Jonathan Taylor, and there was this whole track on Taylor for if he could get to 1,000 yards in his first 6 games, and how no one has ever done that. And there's only like 5 or 6 running backs in college football history as freshmen that have taken 7 games to get to 1,000. But he had a chance to be the first ever in college football history to do it in 6 as a freshman. He got 14 yards shy. So he right now is 6th in the country in rushing, but I'm pretty sure that all of these other teams have played 7 games. If not, then you're talking about, players that are not freshmen, obviously. But it just goes to show what he's doing. I mean, he's averaging almost 8 yards a carry, which outside of the guy from Stanford, Bryce Love, who's averaging over 10, there's a Notre Dame guy who's actually averaging over 9 as well. But what Taylor is doing from a historical perspective, he was 14 yards away from being the first guy ever in college football history to do something over a 6-game stretch. So that's pretty incredible. I mean, you're talking about guys like Barry Sanders and Bo Jackson and these guys that just completely obliterated college football. Taylor had a chance to do something, and I think, I'm guessing, 986 yards, first 6 games as a freshman. That's the most ever. That's my assumption. It could be false. But he was 14 yards away from getting 1,000 and being the first player ever to do that. But so Wisconsin obviously can run the football at an elite level. They can obviously play defense at an elite level. Like you said, though, Troy, they haven't played that Penn State type of offense that can score 50 on anyone. Or Ohio State, I'll throw them in the mix now because you're seeing Ohio State since the Oklahoma game. They're putting up 50-plus on everyone. And whether it is against Nebraska, whether it is Maryland, whether it is a team like Rutgers, you're seeing Ohio State just mow through everyone. And I retweeted this tweet from actually one of Landa 10's Ohio State beat reporters that's like, you don't see Clemson crushing everyone by 40 points every week. You don't see Alabama, basically, even Alabama, crushing everyone by 40 points. You'll occasionally see a close one. You're not seeing teams like Penn State crush everyone by 40 points. You're not seeing that other than Ohio State, no matter who you're playing at this point. There's no team that has, over the last 4 weeks, 4 games, just obliterated teams week after week after week.
Could you imagine, Kevin, and I'll interrupt you here because I know we talked about Barrett and his deficiencies. Can you imagine if Ohio State had a quarterback that could throw the deep ball? Would they win by 70?
Well,
I mean, they're doing it methodically, and I know he's doing some things against lesser defenses, but can you imagine? I know we talked about his deficiencies. I just wanted to throw that hypothetical out there. Can you imagine if they had one of those 5-star quarterbacks that was actually pro-ready? Can you imagine that game would probably be over before halftime, and many of these already are.
Yeah. I mean, they're up 35-0 on Nebraska at halftime. At Nebraska, night game. Obviously, Nebraska's loud, ready to go. And Ohio State's pummeling them. And same thing with Maryland, who we laughed at the spread on that one, and Ohio State still crushed the spread on it. JT Barrett right now is making those deep throws, and it's against lesser talented teams like Nebraska, like Rutgers, like Maryland, like Army, UNLV. So it's actually 5 games now. But the last 5 games, Barrett has thrown the deep ball well. And yes, part of it is your wide receivers are getting more open because you're playing defensive backs on Army and UNLV and Nebraska and not Oklahoma. There is a talent gap there. So the margin of error for JT Barrett's throws is less against teams like Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State, Alabama, for instance. Clemson has an elite defense. There is a lesser margin of error there, but Barrett is making these throws down the field, and you saw it a lot during Nebraska, actually. That's when it really popped off the screen, and I didn't see much of the Maryland game either, but he is starting to make these throws, and this offense is starting to look like it can at least threaten teams deep down the field. We'll see in 2 weeks because they have a bye week now. But we'll see a Saturday from this upcoming one when they play Penn State.
Well, there's a second piece to that too, Kevin, is that when you're playing a Nebraska and these teams like Army or the teams they're playing, the pass rush, you got that second piece to it.
Yep.
You mentioned the talent in the cornerback position, which, it's obvious. But then that second piece is not getting any pressure on him, allowing him to survey the field, waiting for the separation. That's huge right there. So when he does play against a Penn State or a Michigan and teams that can get at the quarterback, how is that going to affect him and his ability to hit that deep ball? I think it's going to affect him a lot because he's not going to have 4 or 5 seconds to let that develop. He's going to see pressure coming down the gut or on his left or on his right, and he's not going to be able to let that open route develop. So we'll see how it happens when he plays against a better defense.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that's an excellent point that I didn't bring up at all. But I guess if you're going against a team like Penn State, which Ohio State will in a couple of weeks, that's kind of what to look for, is not just the disparity talent-wise, at cornerback. And so you have that lesser window to throw through, but you also have that pass rush that's going to be in your face every so often, more so than when you're playing teams like UNLV and Army and Nebraska and Maryland and Rutgers. So it's different. There's more than just one little point to it. Troy pointed it out perfectly. But we'll see. And the other thing I wanted to mention with Ohio State, I guess I'm kind of recapping this game against Nebraska because there's not much else to recap with it, but Ohio State's offense looking dominant. The other thing is that Kevin Wilson, the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, he is starting to call better plays, call better schematics, get his guys in the right positions. They're starting to understand what the offensive coordinator wants. Barrett's starting to understand that. This is not necessarily an entirely new offense, but it's different as far as the plays that are being called, the different routes here and there. Ohio State is getting more reps under its offensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, of what he likes to do. And Barrett's learning that. The receivers are learning that. So he even said it after the Oklahoma game that I called a crappy offensive game. Crappy offensive game, crappy plays, crappy game plan. He put it on him. The offensive coordinator did. So now maybe we're starting to see better play even from the play caller himself. But again, like I mentioned, talent disparity, it's definitely going to show up. You're not going to see Ohio State beat Penn State by 40 points. But I do think Ohio State is playing better in general, partially because JT Barrett is starting to play better, partially because the receivers are starting to play better, partially also because of the play calling, the schematics. The offensive coordinator now going into his 7th game at Ohio State. They're going to have a bye week leading up to Penn State. Penn State's got College Game Day coming to it for Week 8. They've got a big game against Michigan. That's going to be huge. And then the next week you have to travel to Ohio State to play while Ohio State's got 14 days rest. It all is starting to come together for Ohio State, and the scheduling, maybe most importantly, favors Ohio State against Penn State a couple weeks from now. But that's the Ohio State game. Was there anything else you wanted to mention, Troy, about Wisconsin and what Jonathan Taylor was doing there and this 8-point win against Purdue?
Well, again, the 8-point win, this is a game that honestly, this could have been the blip on the radar for Wisconsin if that defense doesn't get that big red zone turnover late in the game. I know you said they stopped them 4 times, but at the end of the game, Purdue's driving, and you even text me about it. But then they get a big interception, and that's a huge turnover at that point. But again, that's what this defense has done, and as I watch them, they put themselves in the right position. They are fundamentally sound on defense. And I know I kept saying it's Wisconsin style, play good defense, run the football. But the more I watch this defense, this really, to me, has been one of the better defenses. And you look at last year and the guys that they had, Beasley, Watt, the pass rush, I think this defense is better. And that was a little bit of a question mark for me coming into this year because no Watt, and what are they going to do at linebacker? I was concerned. But these guys that are out there playing, man, they've bought into this system. It is a total team concept on defense, and that's hard to beat. But, again, I want to see a test. They really have not been tested defensively. But up to this point, they've answered the bell. They have done what they need to do. And Hornibrook, I know I probably get on this guy more than a lot of people. Maybe because he's not that big-time recruiter, big-time quarterback. But when you look at what he's asked to do, Kevin, he is doing what he's asked to do, and he's doing it effectively. Do I want him to do more? I wish he could, and maybe he will. Maybe he'll develop more. But some people look at it and say, well, look at his stats. I'm looking at he's not the guy that scares me right now. When you got a guy like Taylor behind you, it makes the game a lot easier. I want to see some adversity before I start jumping on this kid's bandwagon. And what I mean by that is when a team starts to shut down Taylor, and there's going to be a team, this guy's not running for 200 yards every week. What happens when they shut down the running game and you have to put the ball in Hornibrook's hand? That's what I want to see. Can he make the plays at that point? I just look at the things that he's throwing, intermediate, short, intermediate. Can he stretch the field? You know, right now it's easy to try to stretch the field, and people argue, well, he can throw it. Well, you know what? It's very easy right now when you got a guy like Taylor behind you that's averaging 8 yards a carry because it's keeping the defense off guard. What happens when it's consistently 2nd and 7, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10? Can he make the plays at that point? That's why maybe I'm not jumping on this Wisconsin bandwagon that this is a playoff team, because I need to see what happens when he faces adversity as a quarterback, when it is consistently 3rd and long, 2nd and long. I haven't seen a lot of it because Taylor's doing the job. But you go up against the Penn State, or well, they're not going to unless it would be the Big Ten championship. I guess their only real test will be Michigan. What'll happen? But I'll tell you what, Kevin, even right now, if Wisconsin played Michigan and maybe they'll get better by the time the game rolls around, I'm looking at the way Michigan is playing, and I'm looking at this Wisconsin defense going, man, I'm not even afraid right now of Michigan. Is that bad of me to say? I know it's Michigan. The game itself, though, if you're looking at what is going on right now in the landscape of college football, compare the two teams, Michigan doesn't scare me right now, Kevin. I'm favoring Wisconsin right now because Michigan's not playing very good football. And offensively, I'm not worried about Michigan at this point when you compare it to the Wisconsin defense. And after what Indiana did, and I know Indiana's offense, I'll put it this way, I think Indiana's offense on the outside, like you said, with the receivers and quarterback play, better than Wisconsin. But no, I don't think anybody outside of Penn State is running the ball, and Barkley over there is running the ball better than Wisconsin. And some can argue that Wisconsin is even running the ball better than Penn State. But I don't know. I'm still giving the edge to Barkley over at Penn State. But if it could be 1A and 1B right here as far as the best running teams in the Big Ten. But do you see what I'm saying here? I want to get your thoughts. If this game is played right now and we're looking ahead and Michigan continues to play where they're at, I'm favoring Wisconsin in that game, Kevin. What about you?
I was going to say this, that Wisconsin, I mean, it's been known all year that Wisconsin's schedule is very light, and that's why they're a huge pick to obviously make it to the Big Ten title game and potentially the playoff, because all they have to do is potentially pull one upset, and it might not even be an upset if they don't have to play Penn State, quote unquote. But the Michigan game is the one that people have circled for Wisconsin, and even that is at Wisconsin. It's mid-November. I mean, Wisconsin is going to be ready for that game. There's no question about it. And like you said, Troy, the way Michigan is playing now, I think Wisconsin will be able to run the ball not as successfully as they have, running for 200 with Taylor. But I think he picks up 100 for sure. And I don't like Michigan's offense right now at all. And you throw in some cold weather there, and that's not going to help their quarterback, I don't think. That's going to help Wisconsin's defense. I would favor Wisconsin, not heavily, but Wisconsin's playing better football than Michigan is. And Michigan's offense is getting worse and worse, in my opinion. The running game, they've actually had a different running back kind of take over the duties and be that main guy. I had talked about Ty Isaac all year for Michigan, but they've got a new guy who just ran for 200. But I think that in general, the hardest offense Wisconsin has to play this year, just on the regular season schedule, is at Indiana. That's going to be the toughest offensive game they play, because I think Indiana has a better offense than Maryland, Illinois, Iowa, even Michigan, and Minnesota. Those are the only teams Wisconsin has to play that's left, outside of the Big Ten title game if they get there, obviously. But even then, I mean, you could play Wisconsin or an Ohio State team that can't push the ball completely down the field. You could still play Michigan realistically, who, again, can't push the ball down the field with this quarterback. You may play Penn State, obviously. That Penn State-Ohio State game is going to be massive. But Wisconsin may not have to play a real offense until they get to the college football playoff, and that's, again, assuming Ohio State doesn't have a real one if they play Ohio State. But at Indiana, November 4th, that's going to be the toughest test for this Wisconsin defense, which is ridiculous. But Indiana's got good perimeter players. They really do have better receivers than Michigan does right now. They really do have better receivers than Ohio State does right now. Seriously. Ohio State's got more speed, I guess, on the outside, but Indiana's top 2 receivers, if not top 3. They outmatch any other Big Ten teams, just pure wide receivers. I would seriously give Indiana's receivers the nod against any other Big Ten team's receivers right now. And a lot of that is based on them being seniors for the most part. But Indiana's got real playmakers on the outside. They showed it game 1 against Ohio State that those guys can make plays. But that's going to be Wisconsin's toughest test at Indiana. And again, I think Wisconsin wins that game fairly comfortably. But so things are looking really good. In short, things are looking really good for Wisconsin. Scheduling-wise, and the rushing game and defense is playing at an absolutely elite level. So I, right now, just expect this team to be undefeated in the top 5, looking to win a Big Ten title game and move on to the college football playoff. That's how I see it. I don't think they end up winning that Big Ten title game if it's against Ohio State or Penn State, but I think they're knocking right on the door, and it just takes one upset, and they'll be right there.
Well, let's move on, because there's a lot of good things going on in Rutgers football. I know we don't ever share the love in Rutgers. I know we're recapping games. Let's go to Rutgers, though, Kevin, because we're always on Rutgers. We're like putting them under our shoe and rubbing them down into the ground, saying Rutgers. But hey, there's good things going on in Rutgers after last week.
Rutgers had to throw the ball 12 times against Illinois. And I say that because it's kind of crazy. I mean, for Rutgers to have to throw the ball 12 times in any game is crazy, because you would assume that Rutgers would be down and they'd have to be throwing at least 20 times against teams. But Rutgers had to throw it 12 times. They had 5 rushing touchdowns against Illinois. And they're 2-4 right now. They are now 1-2 in Big Ten play. Illinois is now 0-3. Rutgers won that game 35-24. I should have led with that. But you're getting guys who made plays, even against Illinois. Take your shot at Illinois now. But they're making plays. And Janarian Grant on the outside is that one guy I always mention from Rutgers. He finally came back in this game from a health perspective and led the team in receiving with 3 catches, 49 yards. But there was basically no other player to throw the ball to, especially when you only complete 6 passes. But Rutgers did their thing, running the football, going to Illinois, scoring 35 points. Apparently Rutgers is better than Illinois right now. I mean, they just proved that. They really did. It wasn't one of those shocking wins that, they did on the final few seconds. They were up 21-10 at half. They went to Illinois. They put 35 points on the board. They ran all over them for 274 yards and 5 scores. So Rutgers right now is better than Illinois. That's just the way it is, and that's a week away, a week prior to today as we're recording this. I was talking about Illinois and how they shouldn't fire Lovie Smith and how he's starting to get recruiting classes that he likes. He's starting to pick up even a 4-star here and there. I think Illinois seriously is headed in the right direction, but you've got at least 7 starters who are freshmen at Illinois. We've mentioned that on the show a few times. And you throw in the fact that Mike Epstein, the running back, who I mentioned, that freshman, that, other serious schools were giving offers to, and he actually chose Illinois over those other schools, which are Power 5 schools. I don't remember exactly who they were, but they were solid programs, better programs than Illinois, realistically. And he chose Illinois. He was leading Illinois in rushing. Something happened, I think it was in practice, but he's out for the year now. So Illinois is looking to its, second running back. And Jeff George Jr. at quarterback, who threw for 300 yards in this game, but he had to throw it 38 times. So Illinois, I mean, again, you score 24 points, but you lose Mike Epstein for the year, the leading running back. You lost actually a couple guys in this game for Illinois. So things are not going to get better for Illinois this year. I think they do down the road. I think short term, I think Illinois, is building something with Lovie Smith. I mean, if you fire a coach who got to a Super Bowl and you're Illinois, that's insane to me. You're starting to see 4-star recruits. You're starting to see guys like Mike Epstein pick your program over other solid programs. I think he is building something. But right now and for the rest of this year, it's going to get ugly at Illinois, unfortunately. It's not going to get better because you just lost your best offensive player for the year.
Yeah, that's a big blow. I mean, Illinois wasn't going to contend for the national title or even the Big Ten title, but like you said, a good young running back. Now he's done for the year. Kevin, I know we're talking about the Big Ten, but it was funny because I was listening on the radio on Saturday to a recap later in the day, and I'm going to tell you there's one thing that is really starting to irk me about college football, and I didn't even share this with you at all because I just thought of it as we were talking. Bowl eligible with wins. I hear, well, they're only 1 win away from being bowl eligible. This is a crock of crap. I'm just saying it. I don't care if anybody's bowl eligible because last year bowl eligible there was teams under 500 going to bowl games. So I don't want to ever hear. I don't like that term. Oh, this team is now bowl eligible, or they're 1 win away from being bowl eligible because they haven't been in a bowl in 8 years. Well, win some games and go to a bowl game. You only got to go 5-7 because I think there was like 4 or 5 teams last year, Kevin, that were under 500 that went to a bowl game. So I know it's totally off subject, and I don't know why it popped into my head, but it did. And I just can't stand when I hear recaps on stations or in the media, oh, this team's almost bowl eligible or 1 win away from being bowl eligible. I can't stand it. I just had to throw that in there. Let's move on recapping the Big Ten, unless you have something to add about bowl eligibility.
It's not bowl eligibility, but I want to make this correlation that teams also say, like, oh, look at, Jim Boeheim or Coach K or whatever coach, Tom Izzo, and look at how many times they get their teams to the tournament. And it's realistically the same thing. I mean, if you're not bowl eligible and you don't go to a bowl game, that's a atrocious year in college football, no matter who you are. If you're a Power 5 school, you should be winning 5-6 games against these cupcakes when you can win, 3 very easily. It's crap if you don't make it to a bowl game. And it's the same thing as making the tournament in college basketball, because there may be 300 teams in college basketball. You can slice half of those and say you can't make it just based on talent, who they are as programs. There are basically 150 teams, in my opinion, that just can't even make the tournament. And so when you have a team like Syracuse and Jim Boeheim and a team like that doesn't make a tournament, That's an atrocious year. So I hate it when ADs and coaches and beat reporters say, well, look at Coach K and how he took Duke to the tournament 28 straight years. Of course he took Duke to the tournament 28 straight years. They take 68 teams. How can Duke not make the tournament? How can Syracuse not make the tournament? How can Kansas not make the tournament? It's garbage if you don't make the tournament. It's also garbage if Penn State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, whoever doesn't make a bowl game. It's crap if you lean on, hey, at least we made a bowl game, and it's crap if you say, hey, at least we made the tournament this year. It's garbage. Your team was very bad if you didn't make the NCAA tournament, and you're one of these programs who prides itself on, potentially getting to college football playoffs or winning the Big Ten or whatever the case is. You can't say, hey, at least we made the NCAA tournament. It's garbage. 68 teams do it. You shouldn't be applauded for going 19-15 and being a 13 seed. It's crap. That's my little rant on there. But now I can get back to week 7 of college football. And I didn't go through the Michigan-Indiana game, I guess, wholeheartedly, but Karen Higdon and Michigan beat Indiana 27-20 in overtime. We kind of talked about this game a little bit. But John O'Korn, that quarterback who took over for Wilton Speight due to injury, he looked really good a week ago. And there's something 2 weeks ago. And then against Michigan State did not look good. And also in this game against Indiana, which doesn't have a great defense. They've got a decent one, better than most people probably realize, but they've got a decent one. He also looked like crap in this game. So that thought of, hey, we can move to John O'Korn and our quarterback play will be better, that's not turning out to be the case. Michigan is basically Wisconsin, except the running game's not as good, in my opinion, and their defense is not playing as good as Wisconsin. You may have more talent. You may have more stars, according to your name in recruiting, but Wisconsin's defense is better than Michigan's right now. Wisconsin's running game is better than Michigan's right now. There's a reason why Michigan is ranked 19 in the country and Wisconsin's ranked number 5. I don't think that's garbage. So Michigan not playing really well, not getting good quarterback play. They're just not playing that well. And I guess I'll leave it at that to you, Troy, if you have anything to say on that overtime win over Indiana.
No, I had mentioned it earlier in the show. My biggest surprise of that game is that defense let Indiana go down to tie the game. I would have thought that an elite defense would have been able to shut them down at the end of the game. Now, granted, you made the point about, Indiana offensively does have some weapons, but still, Michigan's priding themselves this year, and that's what everybody was saying, on this great defense. And if you're a great defense, you should step up and make the plays. And I don't want to compare them to Wisconsin, but Wisconsin made 4 plays in the red zone, 4 series stops. Michigan couldn't stop them when it mattered the most at the end of the game. Wisconsin did. They got a turnover. So do I want to say Wisconsin's defense is better than Michigan's? As of today, right now, I think they're playing better. But Michigan has more talent on their team. They have more individual skill players on that defense. But team defense, Wisconsin playing better. That was my biggest surprise of that game. It wasn't that they went to overtime. It was how it went to overtime that Indiana actually went down and tied it up to bring it to overtime late in the game. That surprised the heck out of me. That's all I got on that game. Let's keep moving along.
Yeah, I hear you completely. Michigan State beat Minnesota 30-27. I already mentioned that before. I don't have main notes on that other than, Michigan State, like I said before, was dominating. And they lost the fourth quarter 21-7. So they were up 23.
I want to apologize, youngster, to all of the Gopher fans. Ever since I said they are a tough team at home, ever since, I don't think they've won. I don't think they've won a game since I've said that. And I want to personally apologize to all of the Gopher fans if I'm the jinx, and I very well could be. I was giving Minnesota some praise, some accolades, and since then they've just pooed the bed. Literally pooed the bed every week since I've said that. So, Gopher fans, I am sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. I was actually very sincere in giving my accolades on how well they were played at home and that they were a tough, gritty team. And since then, like I said, Kevin, they've just pooed the bed. That's all I got about that game. Minnesota didn't look good. They did not look good. Like you said earlier in the show, they were dominated for most of that game. They won a quarter, and we've talked about this in a big time boxing match. They didn't win many rounds. They literally got dominated most of the game and made it look closer than it really was.
Yeah, Michigan State was up 27-6 going in, 23-6 going in the fourth quarter. That tells you all you need to know. Minnesota is 0-3. Since you said that, Troy, losing to Maryland, Purdue, and now Michigan State. They play Illinois at home next week, then. So that should be a win. But I guess since you cursed them, who knows? I'll also say this about Minnesota before I move on. They picked up a top 300 recruit. I have no idea if he's a 4-star, 3-star, whatever, but it's someone that at least people know of around recruiting circles. PJ Fleck got his first big recruit, basically at Minnesota. That's as of, I think, yesterday. I think PJ Fleck is a very good coach. I think he will keep Minnesota as a quality program going forward, and you'll get your occasional good years where you're sitting in the top 25 for most of it. I believe in Fleck. I believe in Minnesota enhancing its program going forward. A lot of these mid-tier Big Ten programs, and even the bottom ones like Illinois, I think are headed at least in the right direction. I truly do believe that. Moving forward, the only game that we haven't necessarily touched on was Northwestern beating Maryland. Northwestern won that game 37-21. Justin Jackson, the key note, I guess, from this one is Justin Jackson, the running back, became the all-time leader in Northwestern history in rushing. In this game, he has not been completely 100% healthy going into the year, I believe, and I think that it was until kind of this week that he's really looked 100%. But he became the all-time leader in Northwestern rushing, so I wanted to at least make that point. And Maryland is down to its fourth-string quarterback due to injuries. So there is certainly something to be said for that. But Northwestern got a win, and their all-time leading rusher is now currently on the roster in Justin Jackson. So hats off to him and Northwestern for now being, let me see here, I guess they're 3-3. I thought they were 4-2. They're 3-3 on the year.
Only a few more wins away from being bowl eligible.
Yeah.
I had to say it. And I think the biggest note I have of this game, this was a game, if you would have told me 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, this game, if I had to make predictions, then this is what we expected Northwestern to do. But I think the biggest takeaway from this game is that Maryland didn't have to go to their fifth-string quarterback. And because they've just been depleted with quarterback injury after injury after injury, and it's tough sledding for Maryland, and I don't want to make light of it, but when you're going that far down the depth chart, what more can you expect from Maryland? But on the other side, Northwestern at 3-3, I thought Northwestern was one of those mid-tier teams, Kevin, that every once in a while could maybe make some noise against one of the powerhouse teams. They really hadn't shown it up to this point. Now, again, they played against a Maryland team, like you said, with their fourth-string quarterback. So how much stock can you really put into a dominating win like this? I'm not sure. But if you would take that middle tier of teams, I would have put Northwestern near the top of that tier as a team that maybe every once in a while, should things fall into place, would be a team that could give some of the top-tier teams a run for their money. Up to this point, up till this week, Kevin, I hadn't seen it from Northwestern. I don't know if this is a turning point for them because it was against a depleted Maryland team offensively with their quarterback situation. And Maryland really isn't a juggernaut defense to begin with. And you would think the way that Northwestern plays, that this would have been the outcome should you have asked me 5 weeks ago. This is what I would have thought you would have seen.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I will move on to, and that was all of week 7. I'll move on to Week 8 and preview that before we let the listeners go. It's been an hour now, and we talked before the show about trying to keep the show to an hour. It's already been an hour. But follow us on Twitter, at Youngster Old Man. That's our show handle. Follow us on Twitter personally, at Kid Cunny, KIDCUNI. That is mine, and at Troy Robert 967. That is the old man's Twitter handle. Send us questions. Tell us we're stupid.
Little disappointed today, Kevin, that nobody called. I was really hoping somebody would have called. We tweeted out the numbers. So for those that listen in, and we know people listen, we see the stats, we see the analytics. we get some good listening going on here.
Yep.
If you're listening to the show, and I know it may be a weird time, and Kevin and I try to do it Monday afternoons between that 4:30, 5 o'clock range due to my professional commitments. But if you're listening in next Monday, we're going to try to keep it around that 5 o'clock time frame. So if you're available between 5 and 6 Eastern time, we're going to tweet the number out next week again. Call our studio, our pre-recorded studio line, and it doesn't have to be, well, if you're listening to the show, you're a Big Ten fan. We'll talk about any team. We'll talk about anything. If you want to talk about AP Top 25, you want to talk about, Sunset University over wherever, we'll talk about them. We may not know a lot about them, but we'll talk about it. Call us. We want to interact with fans via the show now. We've been doing it via Twitter, been doing it a little bit on LinkedIn also, but we want to do it while we're recording the show. So call us. Didn't mean to cut you off there, but I wanted to throw it in there. I was a little disappointed today that nobody called.
Yeah, like you said, we see the stats every week, and it's not as though we're getting 30 listeners a week. That's not the case. We're getting numbers over 500 eventually that are listening to the show. We know people are listening. I didn't want to give exact numbers out, but we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listeners week after week after week after week, no matter what is happening. Whether it's a dry period and there's no basketball or football to talk about in the Big Ten, or there's some huge scandal or whatever, we'll get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listens throughout the week. And I don't, check back on shows a month later, but I don't know what those numbers
we do, and I'll throw this out there. We're already over an hour, and if you're listening in, sorry, I have to throw this out. I got to pat us on the back. One of our shows, it was the one where we talked about the Wisconsin pulling the scholarship. That is one of the top 20 listened to shows on The Grueling Truth. So of all the shows on the website, our show is in the top 20. That one's got thousands of listens. So we know people listen. Call us. We want to talk to you. Maybe you don't want to talk to us, but we want to talk to you. Let's move on. Let's look at Week 8, and let's try to come up with a lock of the week. It's got to be a game we both agree on. We're 1-0. So let's try to find that game in Week 8.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll start with Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 24-point favorites over Maryland. Wisconsin's at home in this one. It's a noon kickoff. Picking Wisconsin minus 24, you've got to look at the other side and think they're pretty bad just because of how Wisconsin wins football games. And you're playing a four-string quarterback here at Camp Randall. It's going to be very tough for Maryland to do things offensively. I think it's possible Wisconsin wins the game by 28. To win 42-14 wouldn't shock me. To win 38-10 wouldn't shock me. I wouldn't say it's a lock, though. I wouldn't feel 100% stamp of approval. This is the youngsters' lock of the week. Obviously, in short, non-betting-wise, Wisconsin should cruise. Like I said, their defense should control this game. The running game should control this game. Nothing should be different than what we've seen Wisconsin to do to other teams to this point against Maryland on Saturday.
Nah, I'm with you. This won't be our lock of the week. Could they cover? They could, because of a guy named Taylor. It's not going to be because they're offensively scoring up and down the field. The thing is, though, Kevin, the reason they could cover this is because Maryland is depleted offensively against a very good Wisconsin defense. As I talked about earlier, if they create turnovers and give the Badgers short field and they're playing from Maryland territory the whole game, they could put up 38 points. They could put up 35 points. I'm not sure how many points Maryland's going to be able to score against this defense. If they got to 14, that would probably be where I would cap it for Maryland. So, Ken, Wisconsin, what did you say the line was, 24.5?
24 on the head.
24 on the head. So they would have to score 39 because if you tie, well, no, if they covered, so they'd have to score 38. That's an awful big task for Wisconsin, even with Taylor. But they could, depending on what that defense does as far as turnovers go. If they give that offense a lot of short fields, they could definitely cover that spread. But like you, this is not our lock of the week, but I think Wisconsin should cruise in this game.
Yeah, and just so it's out there, if Wisconsin wins this game 24-0, if they win it 24-0, then then they don't cover the spread. But as a bettor, you get your money back. So you don't necessarily lose if Wisconsin wins right on the spread. If any team favored by 7 points wins the game by 7 points and you bet them, you get your money back. So I'll say that much going forward. But Iowa against Northwestern, and this game is at Northwestern. And Troy, you were talking about how, this could be the turning point for Northwestern. Northwestern at home against Iowa. Iowa is favored by 1 point. It's seen as a pick'em game, basically, by Vegas. Northwestern's at home. I think Vegas sees Iowa as obviously the slightly better team. That's why Iowa's still favored on the road. And I would agree with that, but I would not say lock of the week, yep, pick Iowa, or yep, pick Northwestern. So I'll stay away from that. But just picking-wise, I think I will go with Northwestern because they're at home, and I don't think Iowa is that much of a better team, so I think home field does determine the difference. And if you want to think of it like this, I expect Iowa, instead of a touchdown one time, to have to kick a field goal, whether it's a holding call, whether it's a pass that gets slightly overthrown, whether it's one energetic play because you're at home and it's 3rd and 6 and you get a sack. I think that Iowa scores a field goal instead of a touchdown one time. I think 4 points is a difference potentially in this game because of just strictly home field. I think that's how fans should look at it when you say home field is worth 3.5, 4 points. That's how it should be looked at, is Iowa on the road would score a touchdown if they were at home on one of these 10 possessions they have in this game. Instead, they score a field goal just because of being on the road for one way or another. A touchdown turns into a field goal. That's why home field is kind of given 3.5, 4 points to Vegas, depending on the venue as well. But that's how it should be looked at. That's why I always believe that wholeheartedly, that home field matters for sure, because it takes one touchdown to go to a field goal because of one penalty, one play, one whatever. So I believe wholeheartedly in what Vegas puts into home field and how much that means. And in this game, just in general, I think it ends up making the difference. I would pick Northwestern against the spread. I just wouldn't feel too confident, I guess, about it.
This is not a lock of the week. You're right, youngster. Not a lock of the week. We're not going to disagree. This is a battle amongst two teams that are in that middle tier and what's going to separate them. We've talked about this on the show. We've talked about how hard it is to go on the road, regardless of your opponent and regardless of the record. Northwestern, when I look at these teams, I know Iowa got some votes, two votes, 2 points. But
yep.
Northwestern against the Maryland team, they're not a terrible team. Just they've had some bad luck at quarterback. Again, you got to look at the near past, which is last week. And comparatively, when I look at where these two teams are headed, Iowa had their moment against Penn State. And since then, I've not seen that same level of play out of Iowa. They're playing at the level where I thought Iowa would be. And last week, again, against a Maryland team that is depleted, so I got to preface this. But it also goes back to say where I thought Northwestern would be. And with that said, I think Northwestern is slightly better than Iowa. If I had to rank that middle tier, this game is at Northwestern. I'm with you. I would take Northwestern, but it's not the lock of the week. No,
and I'll also say this about this game before we move on. Iowa is coming off a bye. So they've given, a week off of just to prep for Northwestern. I think that makes a little bit of a difference as well. So again, I could completely see this game going either way, as could Vegas by the 1-point spread. Purdue travels to Rutgers. Purdue is the better team. No question about that. Purdue can score this year. Purdue is favored by 8. I could see Purdue winning the game 27-20, though. I mean, this is not a lock of the week for me either, personally. Purdue could very well, obviously, win the game by 10, 13, even 25 points. But I'm not willing to say that Purdue is going to win by double digits on the road. Rutgers is Rutgers, and you're getting back a very dynamic playmaker in terms of engineering Grant. So I think Rutgers can do some things, obviously, on the ground. You can do some things with engineering Grant on the outside as a kick returner, as a punt returner. I'm not going to say Purdue wins by double digits, but I will pick Purdue to win the game.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I would take Purdue winning by double digits, Kevin. I know it's Rutgers, and I just said it's hard to go on the road and play it in the Big Ten, so I'm kind of discrediting. Well, I shouldn't say discrediting. But I look at a Purdue team, Kevin, that I think offensively is very good. I know that they got stymied against Wisconsin, but most teams of the caliber of Purdue are going to get stymied. I don't see Purdue turning the ball over and getting stalled against Rutgers, because if you look at that Wisconsin game, you mentioned the big stat. When it came time to put your hand in the ground and be a man and win your battle, that's what Wisconsin did. But inside the 20s, Purdue moved the ball a little bit. And this is a Rutgers defense, not a Wisconsin defense. Purdue's going to move that ball, and when they get in the red zone, I don't believe Rutgers is going to stymie Purdue. For me, I take Purdue on the road to cover and give the points. I believe they win by double digits at Rutgers. I know Rutgers is coming off a big win. I know they got a couple playmakers, so they might score some points. But I really honestly believe, Kevin, that Purdue getting the ball could pretty much score in every possession they have offensively, because I do like what Purdue has offensively. They can move the ball, and they were moving it inside the 20s against the Badgers. If you go back and watch that game, they moved the ball. Just when it mattered, they couldn't punch it in. They couldn't get points. And against a Rutgers defense, I think Purdue gets those points. So I think Purdue's going to be able to move the ball. Now, defensively, that's where the question mark might be. Again, they played against a Wisconsin team that's just going to run the ball down your throat. They're not going to score 35 against you. Rutgers now, they have an explosive playmaker. They could score some points. But I'm still taking, for me, Purdue giving the points. I think they cover that spread.
I am sorry to not wholeheartedly give us a lock of the week for the week on that one.
Hey, we don't agree. We've said this on the show, youngster. We don't agree to appease fans. No. We don't do that, so we're not giving in. We just talk the truth. That's all we do. That's why I like doing the show with you. We disagree on that. We pick the winner. I give the points. You don't give the points. So be it. Let's move on.
Yeah. So is it safe for me, Troy, to, I guess, pencil that in as your lock of the week?
Not necessarily, because I got to tell the listeners, Kevin and I do not go over these games before we get on the show. Let's see if there's a game we agree on. But for me, that would be the one where I take it. I'm not saying it is the lock of the week, because I want to see where you're going. And if we agree on one, we'll make it unanimous that is go big or go home lock of the week. If we don't agree, then yes, then we can go back and say that's the old man's lock of the week. But I want to see if there's a game we agree on.
Yep. Indiana traveling to Michigan State. Michigan State probably seen as the better team. They are, according to Vegas, but not by very much. They're 7-point favorites, so throw home field out. They'd be basically 4 or 3-point favorites. Vegas doesn't see a huge difference in these two teams, and honestly, I don't really either. I think Indiana is better than what people think. I think they showed that against Michigan. I think Michigan State is not the 18th best team in the country. I think this is probably the 27th best team in the country going against the 39th best team in the country. That's just my rough guess on it. The 27th best team in the country has home field. They should win. I won't pick one way or another. A 7-point line, I could see Michigan State winning by 10. I could see Michigan State winning by 3. I think Michigan State wins, but if I had to pick against the spread, I would pick Indiana plus 7. Michigan State's favored by 7 points. I would take those 7 points with Indiana. I'm not saying it's a lock, though. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I think Michigan State wins by 3 or 4 points. That's my take on it.
We're totally different on this one, Kevin. I like the way Indiana played against Michigan. I know Michigan has some questions, but the way that they went and maneuvered that last drive, I think this is one of those games as a coach that you hate losing. But the confidence level that that team got by being able to go down and tie that game, even though they lost in overtime, I think that's a huge confidence boost for this Indiana team. Like you said, I don't think Michigan State is as good of their ranking. I think Indiana wins this game in a major upset. So that's my upset of the week. That is the old man's upset. Taking Indiana over Michigan State.
Okay. Fair enough. And I would take Indiana the points. I'm not giving it my lock of the week, a.k.a. it would certainly be go big or go home's lock of the week. I'm just not 100% sold on it. If you want to call it our lock of the week, feel free because we're both picking it. Just for me personally, I would not put money on Indiana covering the spread. Troy apparently would.
Then you can't call it the lock of the week.
No, I can't.
You can't call it the lock of the week. Not
nope.
if you. I know that you don't bet, but if you were playing with play money and you wouldn't bet, well, then it's not the lock of the week. But this is my old man upset, Indiana over Michigan State. But I wouldn't even call that. Like now I've got 2 games. I would still, if we don't agree, I'm still going back to Purdue over Rutgers as my lock of the week.
Yeah, fair enough. Illinois at Minnesota. Minnesota, again, probably seen as the better team. They've lost 3 straight, though.
We got to talk about this game?
Not much to talk about. Illinois looks like the worst team in the Big Ten after losing by double digits to Rutgers.
So does Minnesota. After the old man gave them accolades.
Minnesota's favored by 14. I would pick Minnesota to win. I'm not sure about the 14-point spread. I could see it again either way, unfortunately. I'm not very 100% sold one way or the other. Very sad. But I can't put a lock of the week on this. I think Minnesota wins the game. They are at home. If it was at Illinois, I think it would be more interesting. I think picking Illinois in that spot would be very enticing, which would certainly be a Vegas upset. But Minnesota's at home. They're favored by 14. I would probably take Illinois in the points if I had to. But I think Minnesota wins this game by 10 or so.
To appease Gopher fans, I'm not saying anything about this game. I am not saying anything because I really feel bad that I gave them accolades and they pooed to bed the last 3 weeks. So for this game, I'm pleading the 5th. No comment.
Fair enough. We'll move on to the last game of the week, time-wise, for the Big Ten. Michigan at Penn State. Penn State is favored by 9.5. And, again, I just don't feel 100% confident one way or the other because I can completely see them honing in on Saquon Barkley like Northwestern did, and Northwestern and Penn State just not being able to do what it wants to offensively. And so, yeah, I can see Penn State winning 20-13. I can see them winning 23-14 and not covering the 9.5-point spread. I can also see Penn State winning 24-14. So I'm not 100% sold one way or the other. I think Penn State should be favored by 9.5. I think that's a perfect line for it. Penn State should win the game. No question about it. We'll see what they can do. I'm sure Michigan will key in on Saquon Barkley. And like when Penn State played Northwestern, and Northwestern, that's all they wanted to do was stop Saquon Barkley. He had -1 rushing yard going into halftime. So it can be done if you say, no, Saquon Barkley's not going to beat us. In the second half, he ended up with like 75 rushing yards, but Northwestern completely shut him down for a half. I think Michigan can absolutely do that as well. But I think Penn State wins the game. I think Michigan drops out of the top 25 because they do lose this game. And for 3 straight weeks, they don't look good. But Michigan is definitely a top 25 team to me. But I think because of the polls and the way they work, I think they fall out of the top 25, and Penn State wins by 7 to 10 points.
I'm going with Penn State too, Kevin. Like you said, Michigan, the thing you got to like about Penn State this year, and unlike, and I know I refer to Wisconsin because I am, fan-wise of Wisconsin, one-dimensional type team where they can run the ball. And I had mentioned I'm not sold on Wisconsin at a number 5 ranking until I see what Hornibrook can do when there's adversity, and that adversity is when they shut down Taylor. We've already seen what happens when they shut down Barkley. Yeah, the offense doesn't click like it should on all 4 cylinders, but Penn State has a quarterback. Penn State has weapons outside of Barkley. It is a very good Michigan defense, but now I have question marks, and it goes back. Hats off to Indiana. And hopefully I haven't jinxed Indiana by giving them accolades for what they did against Michigan's defense. But to see an Indiana team do that with pretty much ease at the end of the game, I think Penn State can do things outside of Barkley should they shut down Barkley. Michigan's got a tough task. What do they want to do? Because Penn State is multidimensional. Penn State has an offense that, it centers around Barkley. But if they're shutting him down, they can do other things. I'm not saying it's going to be an easy game for Penn State because it's Michigan, and Michigan is a top 25 team, like you said. Heck, they were in the top 10 for a while. Then they took one on the chin. They're not playing like a top 10 team right now, and that's why I say Penn State will win this game. Michigan's just not playing good football. But I take Penn State.
Yeah. So there is no go big or go home lock of the week. I don't think we necessarily have to pick a lock of the week that both of us completely 100% agree on to put our money on every single week. I don't think that has to be the case. That is the case this week. We are 1-0 in our locks of the week for 1 week. We have never been wrong, but it is 1 week strong. It is not going to be 2 weeks strong, unfortunately. Troy likes the upset of Indiana over Michigan State. It's something I could see as well. His lock of the week apparently is Purdue -8 at Rutgers. I'm not 100% sold on that, although I could certainly see it happening. But no go big or go home.
I play with Monopoly money. I play with Monopoly money so I can make any lock of the week that I want. So the old man's lock with Monopoly money is Purdue giving the points at Rutgers. I just, like I said, watching that Purdue-Wisconsin game, Purdue can move the ball. Rutgers defense nowhere in the vicinity of a Wisconsin defense. They're not going to be able to lock down in the red zone. That's why they are my lock of the week. I think Purdue will probably put up 28 to 35 points easily in this game.
Yeah, and all I have left for this show is 3 Big Ten teams in the top 6. You've got 5 in the top 19. I think you've got Iowa receiving votes. I think you've got teams like Northwestern who on any given Sunday can beat one of those top teams. I think, again, nothing has changed. The Big Ten is the best conference in college football. That's it. That's all I have to say about this week.
Sounds good, youngster. We've kept the listeners long enough. Now, again, listeners, if you've made it this far, you must like what we're doing. Follow us on Twitter. @YoungsterOldMan is the show handle for all of our shows, not only Go Big or Go Home. Follow the youngster @KidCunny, KIDCUNI. And you don't have to follow the old man, but you can, Troy Robert 967. But the challenge, is there one person of the hundreds of listeners we get, unless nobody, youngster, listens to the end, is there one person out there that has the kahunas to call us next Monday between 5 and, I guess, 6:30? let's just say this show is going an hour and a half from now on, because that's about average. 5 to 6:30. We're going to tweet the number out or go to our Twitter right now, because it's not changing. The number's not changing. We want somebody to have the kahunas to call us. You can agree with us, disagree with us. Just do not use any profanity, because I don't want to have to edit the show. I don't want to have to edit you out. So keep it clean. It is a family show, but somebody call us and talk Big Ten football. For that, for the youngster, I am the old man. Thanks for listening in. We will get back at you next week. Have a good night, everyone.